up your lunchtime to join us for this webinar. So Cindy, go ahead. So the first slide just touches on our company and what we do. We have been practicing Agile since 2000 when it was first introduced. We're one of the longest in the industry practicing Agile and also coaching on Agile. We have transitioned both Fortune 500 and community players to Agile, as well as coached way over 100 projects and have broken into the development arena and have up-to-date developed about 20 projects. And of course, based on all that, you can only imagine that we've trained hundreds. So the next slide really talks about what Leanne mentioned we're going to address today. What is Agile, how is it different, and why does it work? In today's society, we do see a lot of constant change. And here is a prominent quote that I find rather interesting, which really reflects this. It is change, continuing change, inevitable change that is the dominant factor in society today. No sensible decision can be made without taking it into account. And this is something that we are seeing more CEOs, more companies looking to address, and finally realizing that change is part of life. Go ahead, Cindy. So, as I said, in today's economy and the future economy, it's really no secret that more and more organizations are being tested. They're going to need to become more competitive, and therefore they're leaning more towards a lean, agile approach. At the North American Computer Audit Control and Security Conference, a survey was done. The results are pretty reflective of what we see in many organizations, that basically many IT projects are stopped. So the following slide will help us look at some of the main reasons for this. Top 2 reasons: business needs have changed, and the project didn't deliver as promised. Now, even myself working in the industry, until I saw the top 2 reasons, I would have thought that the second reason, budget, would have been a primary reason. But it's actually the top 2. So although priority is certainly considered, budget is considered in business strategy, it comes down to the fact that the business needs are changing, and based on those changes, the projects just aren't being delivered up to what the business needs. So here, in the older methodologies, we have been so precise in advance, planning, that basically there's just no wiggle room. So when you come across something later down the line, say 2 months into the project, a requirement has changed, what is happening is with no wiggle room, it becomes a very large inconvenience. And it's a huge change at that point. It's not just a change in the requirements, but it's a change that affects all areas, running up through the business, over to the architecture side, and just across the company organizationally. One small change is like a ripple in a pond at this point. So when business needs change, your whole project is going to be affected. This, of course, affects the budget and has a horrible effect at times on the morale of the teams. Success becomes elusive and will continue to be elusive as long as we define the boundaries of success based on budget, plan features, and schedule. This is truly in comparison to value. When you think about that, you're looking at whether or not you're successful as to whether or not you've been on time, you've delivered the list of items, and you're within that budget. So here what we're saying is that if you compare that to value and what the value of the project really is, that's really where success should be drawn on. So this next slide looks at the actual use of features and functions in a system. Just looking at this, consider the waste of unwanted features. For every feature, in addition to the initial design, code, and test, you have to track, compile, integrate, and test every time the code is touched. You're also looking to maintain the code for the life of the system. If it's not needed now, why would you spend the time to do it? So if you have 20 requirements and only 10 are needed now, those 10 are what should be concentrated on, because odds are, out of the 20, there's a percentage that is rarely or never used. So if you consider that as waste, that's part of the lean process. So the conflict in my experience on projects has always been the ability to change. Projects are not failing because of the people. Although of course people do have a bearing on it, they're really failing because of the methods and the techniques that we're currently using. I mean, this includes the criteria we just talked about that is used to define a successful project and the processes that we're building for the products. The old methods are more of a contractual on time and on budget. The new way is more of a negotiation of value, getting something into the customer's hands quicker versus making it take longer and then it having no value. So, next slide. As we look at the old methods, we're realizing the customer really does not get what they need. Too much time is spent up front. Then as time goes by, the needs change. Reality is, this is life all around, not just in IT. Your needs are going to change, so therefore it only makes sense that they're going to change within business. We can't expect the business in today's competitive environment to require the same type of support and features on day one as they do on day 181, 6 months later. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So with Agile, we do not just look at change in a single way or at a single project and how we're doing that, but we look to change the process across many areas. Go ahead, Cindy. So Agile is more of an empirical process which relies on frequent inspection and continuous adapting to minimize your risk and produce a quality product. Therefore, risk is brought out sooner, working software is delivered, and more important, it's not just delivered, it's actually usable quicker. So as we go through this presentation, you're going to see us talk about time boxing and iterations, and at the end of that period, you actually have something that is you could put into place today, you could put into a release versus just developing it and putting it aside. The empirical process overall expects the unexpected and adapts. So this is one of my favorite slides. I look at this and I think, well, what is your target? In the end, much is going to depend on what you're trying to do. So the process you design to hit a moving target, which is what the projects in today's business environment are, is going to be different from the process you might design to hit the fixed target. The old methods, and we're talking in this case about waterfall, is designed to hit fixed targets, but even if you look at something like Spiral, that's again designed to hit a fixed target. Where Agile, because it accepts change and plans for change, is designed to hit moving targets. Go ahead, Cindy. So I hope by now you're starting to realize the importance of being a little bit more agile. Dr. Timothy Clark and Dr. Conrad Fredrickson state in Search of Learning Agility that at an organizational level, agility is the ability to grow, change, or innovate at or above the speed of one's own market. CEOs, as I mentioned before, are realizing the importance of this. In the 12th Annual Global CEO Survey, 95% of the CEOs rate agility as one of the critical drivers in long-term success. This is only second behind access and retention of their key personnel. Go ahead, Cindy. So Agile looks to keep up with moving targets. It is based on a common set of values and principles. There are 4 values and 12 principles. The next slide talks about these 4 values. So in February of 2001, 17 thought leaders from various successful Agile methods such as XP, Scrum, DSDM, Crystal, etc., gathered at the Snowboard Ski Resort in Utah. And they say they gathered to eat and discover common ground, and hence the Agile Manifesto was born. So these 4 values, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change versus following a plan. So the next slide looks at the 12 principles. I'm not going to read them all, but as you can see, communication, change, working software, which we have already mentioned, are just part of these. Jim Highsmith, who was one of the signers of the original Agile Manifesto, says, at the core, he believes Agile methodologies are really about mushy stuff, about delivering good products to customers by operating in an environment that does more than talk about people as our most important asset, but actually acts as if people were the most important asset. So in the final analysis, the meteoric raise of interest in and sometimes tremendous criticism of Agile methodologies is about the mushy stuff and the values. So this next slide, just gives you a little bit of history and some key events. Again, I'm not going to read it all, but it's really interesting, and one of the more interesting parts I'd like to show you is in 1970, if you look at that second line, Dr. Royce wrote Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. And this here was really one of the advocate documents for a serial waterfall method. However, over the years, waterfall, as it changed, much like anything else does, differed from what the original intention here was. So if you're ever curious and you have nothing to do and you're on a plane, it's rather an interesting read because it really shows how even a methodology changes over the years. Go ahead, Cindy. All right, so Agile in some ways is a combination of all of the best practices of other methodologies, such as lean manufacturing. And many people don't realize that, yes, you're reading a book about Agile, but Agile is just that, it's agility. So in many cases, many organizations are looking towards what they consider a hybrid Agile or a blended Agile, which is in reality Agile, because it's combining some of these best practices from things like lean manufacturing and the queuing theory. Next one. So as I just mentioned, there is a family where some of the common characteristics of Agile were pulled from. And if you look at this umbrella, it just touches on what a few of them are. So you can see here that XP, Scrum, DSDM, Crystal, and others were used. Although Scrum and XP are generally the most common Agile methods used in the United States, Scrum is an Agile management wrapper that can be teamed with any existing engineering practices, but generally appears to be most effective when teamed with Agile engineering practices, such as those used in XP. These methods tend to emphasize Agile and lean concepts and principles, and employ techniques focused on delivering customer value via frequent incremental releases that pull from customer versus demand, and this is a huge part of Agile. They use collaborative self-organizing teams and adaptive planning, which really allows a continuous flow and helps to minimize waste while definitely accommodating the change we keep mentioning. Next one. So here, this is a key principle of Agile. So again, while budget and schedule are certainly ways to ensure that a project doesn't get out of control, they're really not the measures of success. It really comes down to value to the customer. What you're providing the customer, can they use it? And is it helping them with their business needs? This next slide is about time boxing. And I mentioned this earlier. If you have a shorter period of time, so I refer to them as iterations, a 2-week session, a 3-week session, or a 4-week session. And it really, the length of that session comes down to what your needs are for the project and what your team needs. However, if you generally tend to lean towards the shorter iterations, you're going to see that you're going to have something quicker for your customer, and that the actual flow, the rhythm, will help drive the development. So within a time box session, you have all phases occurring. You have analysis, you have development, you have testing. And those phases help actually drive the full Agile development. So the next slide talks a little bit about prioritization. Previously, in a slide about 2 ago, we saw the waste, which is the results of a system developed in an older methodology. So now what we're looking at is prioritization. So by prioritization, you're bringing value. You're looking at what needs to be done right away. And if you recall, I mentioned this before, and you're looking to deliver it right away. So you're bringing more value and less waste. Again, if you think back to that pie chart where there was all that waste, at least 64% of a project gets wasted, this is part of the reason your prioritization is just so important. So next, we have another key principle, which is collaboration. In this slide, the term developers is a generic term, and it's generally used as a generic term, and it refers to all team members. When you think about it, all team members have to collaborate together. They all have a huge part in this, and as you go forward with Agile, you will learn that once on a team, the members' responsibility sometimes will overlap. So you have, in this case, all team members involved in developing the solution. You have constant communication and collaboration, which pulls on the skill set of the whole team. And some people say about this slide that it's difficult for someone to hide. So if someone isn't pulling their weight, it becomes very, very noticeable. So here is self-organization. And this basically is allowing your team to manage their own workload around the goals of the projects. So your team will come together, and as they get into the rhythm, they'll be able to self-organize and look at what their goals are, and at the same time address any constraints or risks that are happening without somebody saying, have you looked at the risk? Do you have a list of what's holding you back? You'll be discussing that consistently because of your constant communication and collaboration. Next one. So if you look at the just-in-time aspect, which I've mentioned again a few times, it's really what needs to be delivered for the business value, and it's looked at within Agile as one of the keys to success. But if you think of that even in your personal life, what do you need to do today? What is the top of the priority? And that's what you may base yourself successfully on. So here in the business world, it's really very similar. I mean, yes, of course, there's some degree of planning, but time and knowledge really goes to the just-in-time aspect of it. So in your next one, again, one of the key concepts is cycle time. And this is something we're continually striving to improve. And as you work with Agile teams, you'll see each team member looking to improve their cycle time. If you minimize the number of things in a process and you concentrate on what you really need to do again, your iteration is shorter, and also as a side thing, odds are your quality is going to be better because you can focus on a smaller piece of work versus having 10 or 12 pieces of work at the same time that you're trying to juggle your focus on. So odds are they found, and I've found, that the quality does tend to seem that it is better. So this next chart actually shows this. If you look at the red line here, you're looking at your large batches and the cycle time. So you can see as the utilization increases, the cycle time is also increasing. It's really reflecting, if you look at the large batch, the medium batch, and the small batch, which is the dotted line, it's really reflecting the benefit of using the smaller batch. Now this next slide is something I run into consistently. I do not know where you all reside, but I would bet odds are that you've all sat in rush hour traffic at some point. So when you think about sitting in that car with all those cars around you, it's very similar to what we just talked about on the other slide. You're sitting there in your car, you have a path, you have all of these cars trying to get to the same thing at the same time. But if you go off-peak, odds are you're going to get there much quicker. So what might take you an hour and a half as a ride to get from where you leave to destination A, in rush hour, off-peak could take you maybe 45 minutes. Well, it's the same if you think about it with the queuing theory. So in the off-peak hours, you have less cars trying to arrive at a destination. With less items to concentrate, you're going to arrive at your destination or the end of your iteration successfully quicker. You're basically minimizing the work that's in progress. So this next slide reflects the 5 iterations of a small project, or 5 time boxes. So the first iteration, you'll see to the left, does include some initial planning, and this is something we generally see in Agile. Of course, you can't get away from planning entirely. So there is usually an iteration 0 or an iteration 1 where different things are looked at, and things as to how you're going to communicate if you have people located in, say, 5 different areas are usually addressed. And then what you're seeing here is your next 3 iterations. And within each iteration, you're seeing that there is design, there is testing, and there is development. Now, at the end of each of these iterations, as I mentioned earlier, you have the opportunity to deliver and release. But in many companies, if you're working on 2-week iterations, many companies can't keep up with that type of release schedule. So in this particular slide, what you're seeing at the end is at the end of iteration 5 is when you're actually releasing. But know this, if at the end of iteration 3, for whatever reason this project was stopped, you would have working code that would be able to be released with the overall organization's release schedule. Next one. So key benefits like improved responsiveness to change and improved communication lead to improved quality. That just makes sense. As we've gone through the presentation, I hope that you're starting to see this with Agile. So focus is maintained on delivering the highest priority items first and more frequently so that the ROI is gained early. There's more control and reduced risk because process and progress is open and visible to stakeholders. Continuous alignment to business needs via feedback loops and iterative planning. Remember the constant collaboration, the constant communication. Work in progress in small batches generally helps in reducing complexity as well. Change is expected, but there is a controlled response to change at predetermined points, and that is generally at the start of every new sprint or iteration. Collaboration and teamwork tend to increase and improve communication. Collaboration, attention to excellence, and improved communication all help improve quality. Also, these practices help move testing forward. Teamwork, collaboration generally helps to improve morale. Relationships with the business partners tend to improve. Productivity increases as your rhythm develops. So as you are in your 3rd iteration and then in your 5th, you're generally finding that as the team begins to gel more, your productivity is increasing, and any inefficiencies at this point are generally rooted out. So the creativity then has time to flourish, and generally that makes people happier. The stakeholders, their satisfaction improves because you have increased delivery, you have them involved in communication, and you have their feedback consistently. So your quality is improving as to what they need. So at this point, it really comes down to what is the bottom line about Agile? Go ahead, Cindy. It's not just a process. It's not just a set of practices. It's not just a set of values that you post on the wall. It really is a way of thinking. And I spent a good 15 years in the industry before Agile. And it was quite a change for me because I came from the old ways. And I will say my first Agile project, I did fight a bit about it. I thought, how can this ever work? There is uncertainty about it. But as I realized I needed to change my way of thinking and the team's way of thinking, it really started to embrace me, and I started to embrace Agile and change. And as I've gone forward with Agile over the last 10-plus years, I've actually applied it to different things in my personal life. Now, I know that can sound a little corny, but reality is it does work. So once you get more familiar with Agile, you'll be able to pull some of those best practices and see how they might work within your own outside life, your personal life. But in this case, again, it's a different way of thinking. You can move forward if you don't have all the answers. It's okay. It's okay not to have the answers. You do a little at a time. You learn a little. You do a little more. Oddly enough, although it doesn't seem like it would move fast, it does. It's basically simplifying and being mindful of the waste. You're breaking the work into small batches and finishing it. It's really going to deliver the value sooner. And believe it or not, again, it is faster and a better use of resources. It makes the team system more efficient, even if it appears there is slack time. The team works better together. They communicate well. The feedback is excellent. Remember, your stakeholders are part of this team. and they just really tend to fly. Steering in Agile is more important than planning, and this was personally for me a big change because I'm a very plan-oriented person. You know, I write things down, I cross them off, and it gives me great pleasure to do that. However, I have learned that steering is definitely more important. A plan, you always need a plan for some form of general direction, but the focus shifts to steering to allow continual, dynamic course corrections. Think about a sailboat. You can have the most intricately laid out plan in the world for your sailing adventure, but when you point the direction of the boat towards the island you want to go to, and the wind changes and therefore the waves change, it's just not going to always cooperate. So you have to adjust based on the data you have. So if you realize that, the best people out there on teams learn to determine how they can do something, how they can change, how they can be flexible. Your overburdened resources, they never work. I mean, reality is, you know, if people are sitting there by the 65th hour in a given week, you know, they're tired, if quality is affected, and the system tends to clog up and slow down. Morale is going to decrease. So by doing it this way, you're steering more than planning. Instead of saying, within this time period, we have to do this no matter what it takes, you're steering it differently. You're not just planning, you're steering how it's going to get done, and you're doing that through iterations. So throughout an organization, trust is generally the basis of healthy teams. I always ask myself, what is the best thing I can do today to move the project forward? And I found with Agile, my job is easier. So the next one, Agile is truly a journey, and I speak from personal experience. It was a journey for me. What I learned on day 1, I learned more on day 51, and now 8-10 years later, I'm still learning. I'm still looking to improve. I'm still striving to be Agile. I strive never to fall into the old ways. This journey here that's up on the slide, these are not all the steps on the journey. These are just some of the possible. And you'll see some things at the top, test-driven development, adaptive planning, automated testing. There's an approach to Agile that I refer to as the holistic approach. So in the holistic approach, you're not just looking how an individual team is working. You're looking how the team is working and how the team is working within the organization and the organization is working with the team. So at a holistic approach, at some point with Agile, you're looking at things like the engineering practices. Or if you've looked at the engineering practices first, you're looking at some of the softer side of Agile. You're looking at the time-boxed iterations and how those time-boxed iterations are able to work within a release plan within an organization. So it's really a holistic approach to this journey. And it's important to know that everyone's journey is different. And within each project, within each team, their journeys are different. So your journey very likely will change within each project that you work on. Every step you can take successfully gets you closer to the goal. Again, remember to think, why are you doing this? Does it make sense? Does it make common sense? If not, you know, maybe I should think about this a little more and maybe change it. Be responsive to change, not unresponsive to change. So this next slide is really the big picture. And I know I mentioned earlier that, you know, you're pulling on some of the best practices. So it really is okay to mix and match the techniques. But no matter what techniques you decide to use, you need to continuously calibrate to the values and principles of Agile. Again, you need to change your thinking and actions, and results will then follow across not just the team, across the organization and the enterprise. So I often get asked, you know, how is Agile different? And I know we've talked about some of these throughout the presentation, but to just do a little bit of a recap, there are really 6 main areas. But primarily, Agile is value-driven, and it is not just value-driven on one level, on 2. Values that are explicitly identified in the manifesto values and principles, as well as those that drive how the team works together. And then, the value for the customer. Traditional environments frequently although not always, discourage people from feeling responsible for anything but their own work area. With Agile, you're part of the team, and the team is responsible. Again, traditional environments tend to inhibit that true teamwork because you're encouraging, in most cases, a white knight, a savior to come in and fix things versus the team to work together. Agile accepts and plans for change. The leadership in Agile is more situational style. One of the things I hear consistently from former project managers in the old methodologies, they tell me that they've become less a master of tasks. They're able to keep a broader view and manage more external communications than the actual team itself. And I've had a few of them actually say it's very liberating when you realize all the burden is not on your shoulders, that you're not carrying it all, that the team together is responsible. So leadership is shared and rotated among the team. It helps to give them a sense of ownership and empowerment, and also helps to teach them. So although, again, you can look at the slide and take your time and go through it, there are some of the main areas. So this next slide, Agile works because it is very different. Its very nature addresses the reasons that projects fail. It focuses on building healthy teams and creating environments which support and sustain them. That's really the secret sauce of Agile. It's also why you hear proponents say that you have to follow all of the practices of a particular Agile method, because in that way you get to maximize your success. Now, we already mentioned that you can do a bit of a blended or a hybrid, and that's perfectly okay as long as you're mapping back to the Agile values. However, if you follow pure Agile, odds are your success rate is going to be higher. So this slide covers some of the other reasons, such as connectivity of the team, which is highly correlated to the team's performance. And I do want to say something here. I mean, don't misunderstand. There are cases where traditional will work. But generally, the right circumstances don't always exist. And some of the more traditional ones need the right circumstances with the right leadership to succeed. The environment, context, structure, and culture tend to limit options, which limits the ability to respond to changing circumstances. I have been asked, does Agile always work? And if it doesn't, why not? For the same reason traditional doesn't always work. The environment, the context is not conducive. But even then, what you'll find is Agile really isn't the problem. What happens is it highlights the problems more quickly, making them visible sooner. So if you're on an Agile project and you're doing 2-week iterations and you're in the 4th iteration and you sit down and you're looking at something and what that something is a huge risk, odds are that risk appeared in that iteration versus in the old methodology it might have appeared maybe 4 months down the line. So you're seeing that quicker. So if you do have to make a decision, do I continue with this project? You're able to do that much quicker. So again, it's not necessarily Agile that's not working. Agile is working in the fact that it's bringing that risk to light much quicker. So why isn't Agile easy? Well, I'd like to tell you it is, but boy, it just isn't. It seems like common sense to me. Because people are involved, it's just not easy. People aren't easy. Think about your roles and responsibilities will change. People often define themselves by their jobs. When they no longer can do their job in the same way, they can become lost for a while until they learn to see, what they still have in worth and value. And it is a change. So as you move into the Agile world, your role changes, and if you have a hard time accepting change overall, you'll have a hard time accepting change of your role. But as you see the benefits of Agile and generally what does happen within a team, as the team members see, wow, this is better, this is making my life easier, they're more open to that change. And, I've also been asked, well, in the roles, I'm an analyst. Does that mean, analysts aren't valuable anymore? Well, of course analysis is still value. It's just valued differently, and how things are done are different. The interaction changes. There's no more throwing something over the wall to the next functional phase or group. People have to take ownership. They can't hide in the obscurity of the process. And that can be scary when you think about it. And it's scary for most people. Processes change. In development, you may begin pair programming. Testing, you're consistently testing and moving forward. And sign-offs, they're history. So people have different tolerance levels for change, but for many people there's still some element of fear. They fear the change because they think it brings destruction for what they have. It destroys part of their old life, something they've become very comfortable with, and creates something new in its place, something unknown, which many people fear, and unfamiliar. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Progress is impossible without change." So I tend to keep that with me as I work with Agile teams. It's important to realize that to move forward, you have to be open to change because things do change in the business world and in life. And finally, next slide. Cindy, thank you. Don't just do Agile, be Agile. Because again, if you're going to preach it, you really should live it. The principles and values, as I mentioned before, can apply to your everyday life. There's no reason to put it aside when you walk out of the office at 5 or 5:30. And odds are with Agile, you will be able to walk out of the office at 5 or 5:30. All right, the next slide, I have questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Rose. This is Leanne again. We do have a few questions. We also have a few polling questions that I know we'd like to go ahead and launch. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first one and ask the first question that came over through the chat. The question is, I heard that you don't need documentation in Agile. Is that true?
No. Boy, wouldn't that be fun. What you really need, much as like you're doing Agile, you need what you need. So instead of having a phone book or killing a forest, if you really only need 12 pages of documentation, that's what you have in Agile, 12 pages. If you really need 50, then you really need 50. But you always have to ask yourself, am I creating a book? Am I killing a forest? Do I need these 300 pages? It's that simple.
Excellent. I know we've got, like I said, a couple more polling questions and a couple more chat questions. If anyone else on the line has any additional questions for Rose, please feel free to use the, like I said, the chat feature within the control panel, and we'll try to answer all of them. The next question we have here: do Agile projects fail like other projects fail? And I'm assuming when they mean other projects, they mean other traditional projects.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, with Agile, yes, a project can fail. Generally, it'll fail because Agile brings the risk to light sooner. So you're seeing that something's different. You might need to stop the project or change the path of the project. But again, you're seeing that maybe, in the first part of the project versus the middle or the end. So you're able to possibly recoup any of your ROI and possibly reuse some of the code that you may have already developed if you're changing direction in some way. You can see that right up front with Agile.
Excellent. We have another question coming in. Can Agile be applied to business projects other than software development or engineering?
That's a very good question, and yes, most definitely. Many of these methodologies did not begin in IT. And Agile can certainly be used to improve your process, not just the process of how a team develops. So we work with different companies that use Agile within, say, their HR area or within their accounting group to improve their internal processes. I'm actually working with a government agency now looking at helping them improve the passport process using Agile.
All right, we have another question. Please describe the user story versus traditional requirements.
Very good. So when you think of, say, an Excel spreadsheet of user requirements, you also have a list of user stories. And those stories later become tasks. The stories are kept small. What we don't want to have is what's referred to as an epic story, where it's going to take more than 1 to 2 iterations to complete. Remember, these iterations are small time boxes. Where in a requirement, one requirement, I've been on projects in the old days where one requirement could take 3-4 months to complete. So with a story, you're looking to complete that. And with each story, there is acceptance criteria as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. So this actually feeds in well to the next question, which is project success criteria. When does the project end?
That's a very good question. Because with Agile, you have that ability with each iteration to make a change. But keep in mind, the stakeholders, they're part of the team. There's that constant communication. So where in that initial, I mentioned that initial planning, that iteration 0, you may have, in your mind that, this seems like it's going to take 4 iterations of 2 or 3 weeks each, and you do 2 weeks. At the beginning of each iteration, you have a planning session. At the end of each iteration, you do a retrospective where you look at what worked good and what didn't work, and you have that ability to change. During those same occurrences, you're looking at the overall project. So you're looking at the iteration. You're looking at how that iteration is affecting the project. So if there does need to be a schedule change, that change can be discussed by the total group, the stakeholders, the business folks, the IT group. Everyone who's involved in that team can discuss that and talk about that change. So like any other project, you go into it with some idea in mind, of course. But because you're accepting change, you know that going in, that change is going to happen here and there will be change. These story cards, if I have 100 story cards when I have on day 1, those story cards may change. I may have less, I may have more further down the line. So your project ends when your customer has decided that they have gotten the business value, the total business value they're going to receive out of the project.
Excellent. We also have quite a few more, so I'll go through as many as we can, and I know Rose is more than happy to answer the rest of the questions offline that we don't get a chance to get to. But the next question is there formal training available for Agile like there is for traditional project management?
Of course. There are different types of Agile training. I mentioned earlier that Scrum is one of the methods that works very well with Agile. So you could have Scrum training, Scrum Agile training, Lean Agile training. But it's not just the training. I can't emphasize this enough. I mean, think about it. When you went to college and you got out of college compared to maybe a year later, were you better doing your job a year later or the day you walked out of college? Hopefully a year later. So it's the same with training. When you receive training, you want to be prepared to start the project when the training's over. But we always advise that in the beginning, if you're brand new at it and your company's brand new at it, that you have someone like a coach there with you to help get you rolling, because you don't want to just do it from 1 week's worth of training. You want to do Agile successfully, so you want to pull on the experiences of someone else. And in that scenario, in many cases, what we try to do is connect you not just with a coach, but connect you with another company that has gone through it, so that you have an outside network that you can also go to for help. So, it's really in this way, I think, more of a holistic approach to learning Agile. So you can have the training, you have the coaching, and along with the training and coaching, you may want to look at the team, the engineering practices, as well as your leadership. Because like any methodology, you need the support of your leadership. So there's training at different levels, and then as you get further and further into Agile, there is training on, helping you adapt to your new role. So for example, there's a role referred to as product owner. There's training how to be a really good product owner. And that's something, we don't recommend day 1, but as you go further into it, it is something we would certainly recommend.
Excellent. Next question is, how critical is it to have a team completely dedicated to one project at a time? Can teams or team members work on something else between iterations?
Between iterations. So I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I'm going to answer it in two ways. So obviously, if you have a dedicated team, co-located, working together all of the time, they're going to flow better. The rhythm's going to get started quicker. However, in many organizations, it's just not possible. I recently left Portsmouth, where I was working with a team that is a pure support team, and their phones ring consistently. So the way we worked it there is we had what we refer to as core Agile time. So for 3 hours every day, we came together as an Agile team and addressed the Agile story cards that we were responsible for. And outside of those hours, those core hours, the team worked on other things. Now, I have not to date, and I've worked with many teams, worked with any team who did an iteration and then stopped for a period of time. I mean, if there was an emergency, of course. I did work at one company where their power blew for 3 days, so of course the iteration stopped. But generally, that core team, whether they're working 8 hours a day, 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, is working together throughout the iteration, throughout the life cycle of the Agile project. So I'm hoping that answered the question.
Very good. It looks like we've only got a few minutes more, so probably should do a wrap-up. There's still quite a few questions in the queue, but I know we'll be able to have Rose follow up with those people individually. But I think this has been an excellent session so far. So Rose, if you have anything else you'd like to end with, please do so.
Definitely. So again, I want to thank everyone for giving up your valuable time in your lunch hour. I'd also like to say you're more than welcome to contact me with any questions. You go home tonight, you're in the shower, and something hits you, feel free. Leanne does have my contact info. Real quickly, very simply, it is ranton, R-A-N-T-O-N, @ccpace.com. Feel free. I would be more than happy. I always enjoy working with Agile. It is the way, as I mentioned, I live now, so I'm more than happy to help others get there.